At this point, I would like to introduce Lux Research's Matt Wagner. Hi, Matt.
Hi. Thank you, Brett. So as Brett said, today we're going to be talking about business model innovation. In particular, what we're going to try to get at is whether or not this is just one of the latest kind of business consultant fad. Is this actually a concept that can be really useful for you and your company? Before I get into the presentation, just a real brief introduction about Lux Research. We're a company that helps other companies go through technical innovation. And we do this by providing primary research, fact-based analysis, and informed opinions around emerging technologies and around innovation. This enables our clients to make better decisions. And so as part of this, as part of looking at innovation as a concept and innovation and how it's practiced, that's where the genesis for this webinar. So presentation. So here's a picture of an angry CEO yelling and demanding that we need business model innovation. It's actually a particular CEO. This is actually Lou Gerstner, a famous guy who was CEO of IBM a couple decades ago. And Lou will actually come back later at the end of the presentation. He'll come back into the presentation. But really, this is something that I think many of our, the people on this teleconference or on this webinar, might have experienced, where you have a senior executive who comes to you and says, heck, we got to go. We got to do business model innovation. Go and do it. So why do we have these angry executives saying this? Why are they demanding this? Well, it's really twofold. One is, in an increasingly competitive environment, just to survive, companies have to innovate. So the need to innovation really is great. But business innovation in particular right now is a really hot new topic in business management. So it's something that people hear about. It's something that people say we need it, and so they demand that you go ahead and try to execute it. There's a real problem with business model innovation. And that is, it's a really nebulous concept. You can read a whole bunch of literature about it, and people say many different things about it. And because it's nebulous, it becomes really hard to understand. And because of that, it's really hard to make it pragmatic. It's really hard to use these things, this concept of business model innovation pragmatically and actually implement and get stuff out of it. So here's just an example of 4 of these things we're going to call them frameworks, a business model innovation framework. And there's lots of business consultants out there who'll tell you that. They'll say, hey, if you do these 4 things, or you look at these 8 aspects of your company, here's where you're going to be able to find opportunities to innovate your business model. But just at these 4 examples, if you look at them, they all disagree. They all say different things, right? So one wonders, are they missing things? Are they including things that are relevant to your company? It can really be, a tough thing to figure out. And I always got frustrated. I spent most of my career in industry doing R&D, with big companies doing R&D and new product development. And, there are some very good business consultants out there, but, still a lot of them, would just frustrate me, where they would say, here's our system. And the question would be, well, why those things? Why is that going to help me? Why does that get to my problem? And so what we're going to do here at Lux is we're going to try to help you get through that, right? So as a loose metaphor, we're going to take this kind of muddy glass of water, and we're going to have some clarity to it. And to get that clarity, we're going to give you 4 different things to clarify this issue or this concept of business model innovation. Give you some clear definitions about what one means about a business model and what is business model innovation. Then we're going to talk about corporate innovation in general, kind of a broad look at corporate innovation, and give you a tool that we're calling the Lux Business Model Innovation Framework. Then we're going to take a deep dive into one kind of innovation, one kind of corporate innovation that's a real hot topic right now, which is revenue capture innovation. And we're going to present another tool for you there, the Lux Narrow Business Model Innovation Checklist. And then we're going to finish off with one example on innovation, organizational innovation. The next thing we're going to talk about are some definitions around business model and business model innovation. And at Lux, as we thought about this, we actually had a lot of discussion and a lot of argument. Some of it got pretty heated about what do these really mean, right? So a real simple, although glib, definition of business model innovation would be anything you do to innovate your business model. but that's into the question about what is a business model. So you need to kind of define both of them. And if you look at the literature, you look at what people say, they kind of cluster around two different kinds of definitions or two different definitions. And we went back and forth about which is the right one, which is the wrong one. And finally we came to the place that said, really, they're both very useful concepts. Both of these different kinds of definitions are very useful. So I'm going to present you two definitions for each of these concepts. And we'll use them in the rest of the presentation as well. So first, I'm going to start off with narrow business model innovation. And a narrow business model innovation is based on a narrow definition of business model. Here, a business model is defined as how a firm earns revenue and generates profit. So the idea of innovating that kind of business model is basically changing how you receive money and how the products are exchanged while the product and market stay unchanged. So if you look at the cartoon, and this kind of goes back to, kind of old standard traditional looks at how innovation works in a corporate environment, is you have product innovation and you have market innovation. What narrow business model innovation says, hey, let's not really touch the product and let's not really touch the market, and instead let's innovate about how we're actually capturing that revenue, how we're actually doing that transaction. Let's change that, let's innovate that, and from that be successful. The reason why this is a hot topic right now, and this is the reason why the pointy finger angry CEO is asking about business innovation, it's really about revenue model innovation, and it's specifically because digital technology over the last couple of decades has enabled some really fantastic success stories. And some iconic examples would be Airbnb and Uber and Amazon, where none of these companies have really revolutionized. They haven't changed the product, they haven't changed the market, but they've used digital technology to change the transaction, to change that revenue capture. So that's why this is a really, really hot topic today. And I'm going to also give you the broader definition. And again, as I said, it's important. Both of these definitions are really, really important. The broader definition, and this actually tends to be more of the academic definition of business model, is a business model is all the core aspects of a business. So going to that cartoon I showed in the previous slide, you have your market, you still have your product, you also still have revenue capture. Now you have this green circle that's all the other aspects of that business. And broad business model innovation says, let's innovate all of these different aspects, or any of these different aspects, right? So what broad business model innovation captures, it captures the traditional product and market innovation. It captures this narrow business model innovation, which is really around revenue model innovation. And there's some other forms of kind of non-traditional forms of business innovation that it captures as well. So now we have those definitions in hand. In a further effort to get some clarity, let's start taking a look at about innovation in general. And what I'm going to walk you through is Lux's framework. Lux is, again, we showed you at the beginning some consultants and their frameworks. And we're going to go through and kind of develop our own corporate framework for corporate innovation that really is associated with that broad concept, where we're really looking at all the aspects of a business and all the aspects that you can innovate. We're going to start off by making a little diagram here. And I particularly like these kind of diagrams. I'm a chemical engineer, and so having kind of a block flow diagram is really simple and really kind of straightforward for me. It's kind of one of the things you learn in your first chemical engineering class. But what we're going to do is let's boil down a business to its absolute essential act, right? So what is a business doing? The absolute essential task of a business is this buyer-seller transaction. So it's pretty simple. A supplier offers product to a buyer, and in return, the buyer gives money to a supplier. So you have this little diagram here. I'm going to work on and expand this thing a little bit, add definition to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to describe these two organizations. So you have the supplier organization and you have the buyer organization. And we're going to come up with two concepts or two aspects to really try to define those organizations in a reasonably complete way. And what we use is we use this thing called activity theory. Activity theory, there's a lot to it, and it goes to actually like the 1920s. Actually, Soviet a kind of meta-psychology theory about how people engage with work and how they get together and do an activity. And it's really kind of popular nowadays. It's used a lot by people who study human-computer interaction. Again, there's a lot of aspects to activity theory, and something that I find really fascinating and can talk lots and lots about. But one of the points, and we'll just leave it here, is one of the points that activity theory makes is that if you're trying to look at an activity, you're trying to look at work, you really need to look at two main things. One is the task that the people are doing, and the other is the organization, how the people are organized together. So you kind of have this dichotomy of task versus organization. So we're going to follow that here, looking at the supplier, looking at the buyer from a task perspective, and then from an organization perspective. To do that, you come up with these four concepts. So the idea is on the task side, the primary task or the core task of the supplier is applied technology. It's the creation and delivery of that product, right? And then associated with this product, more task for the buyer is the use of that product. So it would be application technology. So you see the two of them on the top of this diagram. Then let's look at the organizational side of it. For the supplier, for themselves, it's how they're organized internally. So it's the organizational design of that company. And then the organizations on the buyer side would be markets. Move on and talk about the other two parts of this buyer-seller transaction. And these are the product and the money. These are the things that are being exchanged between the two organizations. So one, the concept that we're going to look at is we're going to divide it between the supplier side and the buyer side. And the concept behind that is this transaction, there are two organizations that are involved in this transaction, so each of them need to have equal weight, the supplier and the buyer. Same thing we did before, and we come up with words, concepts that try to capture the essence of that place in the diagram. So so if you look at the aspect of the product that comes from the supplier, it's going to be the product itself. But if you look at the aspect that's really come from the buyer, it's the requirements for that product. So you have product and product requirement. Money side of it, really what's coming from the supplier is the revenue model, which is how the money flows back to the supplier, how they're charging for it, how the decisions the supplier is making in order to actually get the revenue back into their company. And then the thing that's associated with the buyers is really the value chain. So where are all the handoffs between all these different companies? So the value chain or the sales chain, how are all those handoffs going in outside of the supplier? So you have these four concepts. You put all eight of those together, and you have this complete diagram. So this is, for us, this is the Lux Business Model Framework diagram. This would be the definition of kind of our definition of what is industrial business model. Again, with the broad definition of business model saying it's the aspects of the business, here are the 8 key aspects of a business that will define really pretty much any general industrial business you can define by these 8 aspects of a business. So you can then put them in a more conventional framework like the list I showed before, and you get a list like this. So what's interesting about this? Let's just take a pause. I'm going to actually go back to the diagram. What's interesting about this? Well, what you see is, it includes, product and market innovation. Product and market are on the slide, again, traditional stuff. But what you see is there's a whole bunch of other areas that you can go and explore for innovation. So going after, the same things over and over and over again, you may be getting kind of a limited amount of success now. But this kind of opens it up and says, here are all these other aspects that you could look at for innovation. Move forward again. So what does it include? So this framework includes traditional product and market innovation. They're still part of this. It includes the hot topic, which is this revenue model innovation, narrow business model innovation. It includes organizational innovation. And it includes a couple things on top of that. One is a value chain positioning, which is actually something that a lot of firms really do think a lot about, and a lot of innovation is around kind of where you are in the value chain and either moving up or down the value chain. So it includes that. And it also explicitly includes supply technology, which is sometimes, I think, kind of disparaged or kind of neglected in kind of innovation circles, where people get excited about product innovation or revenue model innovation, and or like, you know, market innovation, so M&A activity, all of that. You know, you get lots and lots of talk about that. But there's something to be said for making your products better, doing it, you know, higher quality, better performance, and at a lower cost. That can really be a competitive advantage. So, so it doesn't lose that; it includes that as well. And you use this the way you would actually use this tool, right? It's not just a list for the sake of making a list. It's really a tool for you guys to use. And what this does, you can use it in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways is you can use this list to explore your own company and look at what you're doing and what you're doing with your products, and look at where are there opportunities, and try to help you to kind of do this as a brainstorming or a facilitated workshop, something like that, to see where you might be able to come up with these ideas, right? The ideation part of it can be very, very helpful for the implementation, because it gives you a taxonomy to talking about innovation. And it could be especially difficult. Companies really do get caught in their, you know, existing products, existing markets, and existing business models or revenue models, and they get caught in that. And it's really hard to kind of think outside of it, and it's really hard even to discuss things outside of it. So when you have the taxonomy like this, you have a way of thinking about innovation more broadly. Not only does it allow you to come up with ideas, it allows you to talk about those ideas, and it allows you to sell those ideas and position those ideas with executive management. And let me go back to this. So, and we have an actual report that we've written on this. And in that report, we have examples that kind of go over and illustrate innovation that are in all these pieces. But rather than that, what I'm going to do next is I'm really going to focus on the revenue model innovation in particular. And we'll talk about revenue model innovation, and then I'm going to present you actually another technique that's really a deep dive into revenue capture innovation. And so you can kind of see, again, this is that framework diagram that I had, and what I highlighted in red is revenue model. So that's what we're looking at today. But in each of these areas, you can take a real deep dive into any one of these 8 areas to look for innovation opportunities. The reason we talk about revenue model innovation in particular right now is that we've got lots and lots of interest from many Lux clients on it. You know, again, as stated towards the beginning of the presentation, and a lot of people are really interested in this because of all the digital examples where people have been very successful on innovating revenue models. So that's where it's coming from. So there's a lot of interest in it. So what we've done, Alex, is we've thought a lot about it, and what we've done is we've identified common patterns that you see kind of coming over and over again, both in the revenue model innovation that's been digitally enabled, and you also see the same patterns that are in non-digital kind of companies, right? And so we've identified it, we've mapped it, and then from that we've developed another checklist, and I'll go through that, and then here I actually will go through some examples. What we've come up with, here's kind of the end result of mapping exercise around narrow business model innovation. And it really comes up to kind of two groups of concepts. Let's start the one at the bottom, financial transactions. So here what you have is innovation that's really changing how that financial transaction between the buyer and the seller is going. I'll read these quickly. Again, I'll get into a little bit more depth when I go through the examples, but it could be reduced transaction friction, using a service model rather than a sell a product model, shared use of a product, and then connecting to more customers. But then you do with these revenue model innovations, these financial innovations, is they kind of enable a reformatting of the product. So you're not making a whole new different product, but you're offering that product in a different way. And that's how a lot of this business model innovation actually manifests itself in the real world. So on that, you would have expand supply volume, offering parts or kits rather than offering a complete product, expanding the variety of supply, and then cannibalization of adjacent products. One more thing before I get into the examples, just like we did before with the broad business model innovation framework, you can take what I just did, this diagram, you can put it into the form of a more standard checklist, And then now you have a checklist that can help you, again, think about revenue model innovation, narrow business model innovation, think about it, ideate about it, discuss it, implement. Next examples. So I'm going to start off with going through the financial transaction examples first, and then I'm going to talk about the reformatted product one. So the first one, making transactions easier. There's lots and lots of digital examples of how, digital examples of making things easier. So here happens to be one with mobile banking. I'm actually an HSBC customer, so that's why I picked HSBC. But it certainly has made my life a lot easier, right, using the bank, even more easier than just using my computer. But there have been non-digital examples of making transactions easier, gone back, millennia. So here's a picture of an old Roman coin, but you can think of the exact same thing. An old Roman coin, it's a technology that enables transactions. Before you had coinage, you had to do barter. So your transaction becomes much easier. So again, both digital and non-digital examples of making that actual transaction easier. And I'm going to go through here. Our service model one, this is associated with, again, different kind of revenue models. So I'm going to give you 4 examples rather than just one example. I'm just going to go into it in a little bit more depth here. So there's different kinds of service models. So one is kind of the classic recurring service. And I'm going to talk about the non-digital example first, because this is kind of part of my life now as a suburban homeowner, which is you have the option, you could own the lawnmower or have a lawn care service, right, as a recurring service. So that's what you see as a non-digital example. A really good example in the digital world is doing, cloud computing, and the icon here happens to be for Google Compute Engine, right? So a digital non-digital example. You also have the same kind of thing on a pay-per-use. A good example, digital example, would just be on-demand television. But an older example would be that copier companies made, where instead of selling a copier, they went to a revenue model that was based on every time you use the copy machine, that's how they charge you. So again, going from you buy the copier to you pay per use on the copier is a revenue model. And the revenue models, service models example. One is just a subscription service. So you have Netflix is a subscription service. Their on-demand web service is certainly a digital example. Digital example, recent, and certainly there's lots of advertisement, would be Harry Shave Club. So here, instead of going out and buying the razors and the blades, what you do is you belong to a subscription service, and they're simply delivered to you every month, right? And last kind of example of the model would be a renting model. And again, here, you don't sell the product, you just rent access to that product for a specific time. A digital example would be Zipcar, especially Zipcar with an app. And basically what that does is, instead of having to go through the rental process every time you rent a car, you go through that process once when you sign up, and then there's actions really seamless afterwards. A non-digital example would be belonging to a health club. I took Planet Fitness because, again, I belong to Planet Fitness. But here, kind of the model is you go out and buy the exercise equipment yourself, or belonging to a gym, you're basically renting time on those machines. Let's see. And then I got a couple more of these financial innovation examples. So here's a powerful one, which is shared use of an expensive product, right? So the non-digital example, been over decades, which would be a vacation timeshare, whereas a family may not afford on their own an expensive vacation home. When they divide that expense, multiple other families in a timeshare thing, now you have access to that expensive product or that expensive thing. You're seeing it now, it's huge, which would be an Amazon Web Service, an AWS, and its competitors like Microsoft Azure, where you have cloud storage, right, where, again, they're the ones maintaining the data storage centers, they have the equipment, they have the facilities, they have the people maintaining it, and then everyone who uses that cloud storage, they're sharing that expensive product. And then the final example on the financial transaction side is simply connecting to more customers. The digital example, this is basically any e-commerce example would work. This example actually comes from Ashland, and actually makes composite materials that go into, part of what they do is they go into building materials. So they created an access point where for builders to look at composite builds. So they kind of reach to their customers through a web commerce thing. Again, able to get to connect to more customers. But this idea of connecting to more customers, is nothing new. So in this old picture, there's a guy doing a door-to-door sales on a Kirby vacuum cleaner, which my mother actually did own a Kirby vacuum cleaner. And again, the whole kind of innovation there was, again, reaching more customers. Here, one's digital, one's not digital, but the basic pattern is the same. The pattern of reaching more customers is identical. Now moving on to the top part of that slide, or the top part of the slide where I showed you the 8 patterns we've identified. So these are all focused, the next 4 are all focused around kind of reformatting the product, right? So a digital example, and I know they're getting a lot of bad press, but it's still a great example, which is Uber. So Uber didn't invent getting a taxi or getting a car service, right? What they did is they were able to couple private drivers using their own cars and really increase the volume of supply, right? So they've used digital stuff to increase the volume of supply in kind of an existing marketplace. But a non-digital example would be Costco or a bunch of other of these big bargain club stores where it's like BJ's or Sam Clubs, which consumers to go and get wholesale pricing. So increase the volume of that supply. The next one is to offer part kits instead of offering complete products. A digital example would be iTunes, where you can buy one song, you don't have to buy an album anymore. A digital example is IKEA. I mean, IKEA has been doing this for a while, where you get the flat pack furniture. So, right? So you buy furniture as a kit and then you assemble it. You don't actually buy the furniture. Moving on, so here we have expanding variety of supply. So an example of that, a digital example of that would be Pandora. Here, it's a music streaming service. In your phone, you have, nearly an infinite amount of, potential music that you can listen to, accessing through your mobile device. But again, this idea is a pattern. Expanding the variety of supply is nothing new. It goes back to, I think a great example is the Sears robot catalog, right? Where if you go back to the turn of last century, especially for rural America, is these people really didn't have a lot of access to hard goods, right? There was probably a general store that took them a while to get to, but that general store didn't have a lot. All of a sudden, Sears Robot revolutionized because they were able to give you this catalog. The amount of the supply you had, the variety you had, was infinitely greater than what you could have gotten in that general store. So again, you have here, digital versus non-digital is not the same, but you have this same kind of pattern, again, expanding the variety of supply. And the last example on this narrow business model innovation is cannibalizing adjacent products. And certainly the iconic digital example is, digital photography cannibalizing film, right? But again, this has been happening as long as businesses have been around. So my non-digital example is automobiles basically cannibalizing horses. Before there were, automobiles, you had carriage suppliers and you had horses. You had horses and carriages, and basically the carriage ended up cannibalizing the horse, right? So back to the agenda side, back to our quest to try to make business model innovation clear and to give you kind of some tools that you can use. I want to take one more example, and that's going to be on organizational innovation. And the reason I want to highlight this in particular is, the traditional kind of innovation people understand, market, product innovation, people get that. Certainly, there's a lot of emphasis on this revenue model innovation, which is important. I get that. It's really interesting. But there's something that people tend not to talk about a lot, which is organizational innovation. And the beauty of it is here's real competitive advantage, because this is basically changing your organization internally. It's really hard for your competitors to see what you're doing. It can really lead to a sustainable advantage, right? You come up with a new product, right? The drill, right? 6 months later, your competitors are going to come up with something very, very similar. You change how you function internally, it's really hard to see. It's really hard for a competitor to capture. So where Gerstner comes back, And so what Lou Gerstner actually said, he did not say we need business model innovation. This is what he actually said. The issue looms larger and larger with our company. Why do we consistently miss the emergence of new industries? And he said this back in 1999 to IBM. And then worked on it, and they came up with kind of the root causes as to why they kept missing these new industries. And what they decided, they came up with 7 specific root causes, but they're really all focused around the fact that they were focused on short-term results, existing businesses, and existing business models, right? So if you really think about it, being locked into your existing businesses and your existing business models basically says we're trapped in our business model. So in a sense, even though he didn't say it, Lou also really was saying, hey, we need business model innovation. We need to break ourselves out of the way we've locked ourselves in. The answer to it was to create a whole new organization. They created this emerging business group, this EBO group back in about a year later, and it kind of fit in, and it was this hybrid group, but anyway, they created a new group, they gave them new work processes, they staffed it, all that sort of stuff. And because of that, relatively quickly, within 4 years, they were able to launch several new businesses, 25 new businesses, 5 of which had really significant sales. So here's, again, just one example of saying that, that the problem could be, again, or where you can innovate in your internal structure. Just one last slide, just a conclusion slide to wrap everything up. At least this is what I hope I have left you guys. One is, just remember, innovation can affect all your parts of your business. So don't think it's just limited to products or limited to revenue models or limited to anything. You can innovate in every part of your business. Getting back to the topic or the title of the presentation, yes, business model innovation, it's not bad. Right? It's really not a fad. It's something that can actually be really, really useful. But also, I think it's important to understand it's nothing new, it's nothing scary, it's nothing different. Again, companies have been innovating business models both in the broad sense and the narrow sense for, again, as long as there's been companies around. And lastly, is to really survive in this really competitive world, you need to go beyond product and market innovation. I mean, they're still there, they're still good. Don't not do them. Go beyond product and market innovation. Include this transactional innovation, this kind of narrow business model innovation, and also include organizational innovation. And it's something certainly here at Lux, I mean, we have passion for innovation, and it's something that, we can kind of help you do these things as well. So I guess that.
We'll now be taking your questions, and any questions you have on the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A WebEx box on your screen. Please not use the chat box for questions. If you don't get your question on this call, please contact marketing@luxresearchinc.com after the webinar, and we'll get your question appropriately. So let's take a look. So Matt, the first question is, you discuss a lot of forms of innovation, so you've covered it. You've covered a lot of ground here, and questions is which one of these is the most important? What's the most important part to go into?
I can answer that a couple different ways. I think in one sense they're all equally important because they can all really have an impact. I think maybe a better answer probably is it really depends. It really depends on your business and your company, right? And your marketplace and what you're trying to do. So one of those areas, depending on what you're doing, might really, really stand out, or it might be an area that you just haven't even considered. So I think I think they all can be important, but you really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, your specific company, your specific needs. I mean, if I had to pick one out of them all, again, since I ended with it, I'd have to say organizational innovation. I think that's the one thing that's the hardest to copy, and the one thing that can really have, if you change your organization and you make your organization better, then you can affect all the other kinds of innovation around you.
Great, thank you. So another question that comes up is what are the usually big hurdles encountered by companies that want to do BMI, and how would you approach that? How would you address that?
Well, so the genesis of this work was, I think back in last fall, presentation at an IRI meeting on business model innovation. And so I ran it kind of as a facilitated workshop and got a lot of really interesting, really good discussion, really good feedback. And what the audience said, and these are all like new business development professionals and kind of, major, primarily American, corporations, what kind of said over and over again is for them, their biggest hurdle was kind of entrenched executive management. Was people looking at quarterly to quarterly results, and again, it's kind of the issue that Lou Gerstner, what they pointed out at IBM, is when you're being locked into your existing products, your existing business models, and not being able to get past that. So the solution to that hurdle, I think the only time, if you're really looking at business model innovation, or the only way you're really going to be successful at it is if you do have senior executive support. It's just them saying, yeah, go and do it, but real support, that the senior executives really have some skin in the game and are really supporting the efforts.
Great. Can you give a couple of examples of organizational innovation?
Yeah, I can give you, I'll just make it really easy because these are two examples from my past that I was involved in. So again, there's the example that I showed with Lou Gerstner, which is basically an organizational change. You create a new organization. You can do, I guess I'm getting a little bit of feel, but you can look at, I said I really like activity theory. You can use activity theory to kind of develop an organizational design model, which I've done. And you can look at these different aspects of basically what are the tools that an organization uses to coordinate its efforts. So then the way you innovate is you innovate by innovating those coordinating mechanisms. So, one of the things that I worked on early on when I started getting into work process stuff, was working at Praxair at the time, big industrial gas company, and it was our stage gate process. And we had a stage gate process that basically nobody used, right? And it just wasn't valuable. And so we rewrote that whole thing, and we reimposed it. And we basically made it to the point where every project had to go in it. So it was a whole big work process redesign, right? And then from that, and actually I have a report on it that I gave years ago, a presentation on it, but our throughput, our ability to commercialize stuff rapidly went. We basically kind of doubled our effectiveness in terms of getting R&D stuff out the door, because by putting that work process in place, it forced business and R&D alignment. So that would be kind of, again, a tool-based approach. You can also have, another approach that I was involved with at Praxair was kind of a role-based approach, a person-based approach. And again, one of the issues the company was having was really getting buy-in and connection between R&D and business, especially around kind of business case stuff for new product developments. So the company created, the CTO created a whole new series of roles called, program development managers, and basically marketing people that were embedded in R&D, and they really served as a liaison between R&D and business. And again, that really helped things. So it's roles, it's tools, it's organizations, it's how you incentivize people, a variety of things you can do.
Great, thank you. How to innovate revenue streams in the new Internet of Things and big data concepts in a company that normally works with physical products? A lot of companies are struggling to do that.
Yeah, couple things. It can be really difficult. This came out of, I just really love this concept. It came out of a Lux Executive Summit, not this year, but from last year. It was a couple of times we're talking about kind of data, and you get all this internet data, and you can look at it, and this guy from Oracle was talking about, you can look at it as capital, right? Look at it as, here's a capital asset. I have all this data, and I can do something with it. But you also can look at it as data pollution, right, where it's all this trash. You get all this information, and you have nothing to do. So basically, it's just a cost because you have to store it someplace, or you have to go through it and decide what to throw out and what not to throw out. So just having an Internet of Things and just getting all that data to you doesn't, it's not necessarily going to be capital. It's not necessarily going to be trash, right? You got to figure out how to parse that out, right? And I think in a lot of cases, it ends up just being, digital trash. Where you do it, where you can take that data and turn it into actually capital, I think a lot of it is where you have use data. We have a good example from Kaiser Compressors, a big air compressor company. So one of the things they do, since they now can monitor and have lots of more analytical on their compressors, is you take that data and then you can get into a use profile data to your customers, right? So you can take that data and turn it into something useful for your customers. I think, that kind of model, taking that data into an offering for your customers is one. Another thing, again, less sexy, but it's certainly a really big thing I think you can do with the industrial Internet of Things, is take that data on your own manufacturing stuff. Instrument the heck out of your manufacturing line and really learn how to control your system, really, from a quality perspective. I mean, again, it's not sexy, but, I've always thought, again, I'm a chemical engineer, I deal with a lot of manufacturing issues in my day, right, is that the more data you have on how your plant's operating, the better you should be able to operate that plant. Again, it's not sexy, but, I think it's a good way of making use of that data.
So I think we have time for one last question. New entrants can more readily write new business models because they don't have to deal with their current businesses. Some examples of existing companies that have good revenue and customer networks and have innovated without disrupting their current business.
Innovate without disrupting their current business, that's kind of a tough one. The two examples I've come up with, I mean, one of the things, you think about, this digital revolution and these companies that it's enabled. It's done two things. So one, it's enabled these new companies to come up, but the other thing that's really helped old companies survive. And the two that come up to mind is IBM, which then has, again, really turned itself into a service company, right? And then you had Apple, though Apple actually is a pretty old company from a digital perspective, right? So they're turning themselves from, a desktop computing company into this mobile company and also this content company with iTunes, were really disruptive to their current business models. So, I think, with that, I think for existing companies, if you're going to do that transformation, I really keep your old business model with you, right? If you're going to do that transformation, if you need to do that transformation, do that transformation. And my guess would be, and this really is just a guess, is that companies that don't do it are the companies that try to keep their feet on both sides. And it's that metaphor where you have an ice flow and the ice cracks and it's going two directions. You got to hop on one or the other, right? So if you try to be an old company and a new company, or your old business model and your new business model when it's really radical, I don't think that works. So, the specific example, have people been able to disrupt and still to say the same? Maybe some examples, I don't know of them.
Good cautionary tale, so to make the leap.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Matt. That concludes our webinar today. Once again, if you have any questions, please email marketing@luxresearchinc.com, and if I haven't answered your question, we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.